Hello everyone, welcome to 2018 Spring Parents Dyslexia Summit. Our guest today is John Hicks. John is a parenting and neurodiversity coach. As a father of two neurodiverse daughters, John knows how dyslexia and ADHD can affect the family. He supports parents and children from all around the world on topics on self-esteem, confidence, and self-advocacy, as well as helping these children recognize and reach their own full potential. Thank you so much, John, for being on the summit.
Hey, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And you're joining us from across the pond.
Absolutely. I live in Cambridge, on the east side of the UK. So I'm about an hour away from London, so north of London, yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the summit.
It's a pleasure.
John, you work with families on self-esteem and confidence, which everybody knows that is very important for me, and every summit that we have done, this has been one of the bigger topics that we try to discuss. So can you talk about how dyslexia affects these areas, and what are the reasons why children do have issues with self-esteem if they have dyslexia?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Basically, I think it's fairly simple, really. I think for any child that experiences 10 years of their life in education feeling like that they aren't able to perform as well as perhaps their peers, there's going to be a number of issues associated with self-esteem. We're going to start to notice that, okay, I'm not doing quite as well as my friends, or I'm being told that I'm chatty, or I'm lazy, or I'm not working hard enough. With dyslexia, from what I've seen with my own daughter, who was diagnosed when she was 12, that she went through the whole of primary education, and over here that's between the ages of 4 and 11, really struggling with the whole concept of reading and enjoying reading and taking in information which is often very much text-based. And she really struggled with that. And it wasn't until the school system started to be able to change their standard way of working with my daughter through to working more towards her own learning style, that she was able to start unlocking potential and to really be finding the skills that she has. And I think this is certainly a problem here in the UK in a lot of schools, that dyslexia is not really well understood. A lot of teachers only have about half a day in the whole training course on special educational needs. And so when you're managing a class of 30 and potentially 10 to 15% of your class have special educational needs, then it's a really difficult management process trying to get the class where you need it to be, versus trying to bring in a personalized approach to teaching for the individuals that are struggling to work on perhaps the more accepted learning style. So I can see in those kind of dynamics that are going on, a lot of young people will potentially be having quite an emotionally painful time. They might be looking at themselves, looking at the metrics that are being generated, and seeing that they're not quite performing as well as the people around them. They might be people might be making assumptions about them to their faces, which will maybe they will start to believe those assumptions, when the reality is there's a deeper meaning, there's a deeper reason for why they're struggling at school, and often us as adults can do a lot about that to help them to grow.
Oh, that's great. So and I want to go back to one thing you said, where maybe the school environment doesn't understand what dyslexia is, and that's really striking to me, because I thought dyslexia was new when our journey started, but I quickly understood that dyslexia has been around for hundreds of years. It's just part of the human brain, and people knew about this, and a lot of research has been done. I feel like that research is not just translating into the school environment, and practical things aren't put in place, at least in the US. So do you see that in the UK as well, that the research is there and there are organizations?
Yeah, there's a lot of information around now than say when I was a child at school. So, for example, in my own circumstances, I remember as a child knowing about the term dyslexia. Back then, my kind of view of dyslexia was that that would be a situation where if you're trying to read text, then the letters would be jumbling around, or you couldn't spell properly. Um, and what we have there is a mix of knowledge, because we now know that the stereotypical view of dyslexia is probably what most people are referring to is Mears-Erland syndrome, or what we call in the UK visual stress, which is prevalent for about 40% of dyslexics. But the challenges associated that with Mears-Erland or visual stress is very much very, very obvious, in terms of, a child can say, look, I'm looking at the words and they're jumbling up all over the place. I can't see them. I'm getting my letters the wrong way around. Perhaps I'm struggling with writing coherently because I just can't see what I'm doing very well, or I'm just struggling generally with schoolwork. What we know now is that dyslexia is very much a language-based disorder, and that's more about how our brain processes information. And it's quite possible to be dyslexic without any of the more well-known challenges that are associated with visual stress. So over here, in terms of awareness, I do believe the awareness is getting better. There's some great organisations over here, notably the British Dyslexia Association is a great one. Helen Arkell centres in the UK are very good. They're lobbying the government for better support. They're raising awareness. Lots of people are going to these organisations for more information. Where I think there's a lack of understanding is very much within the school system. And in the UK, most schools have what's called a Special Educational Needs Coordinator, or SENCO. And I think the knowledge of our SENCOs is quite varied depending upon the school you're going to. I've met a whole range of SENCOs that some know a lot about dyslexia, and they know what the challenges are and are very, very supportive. Some, I'm not sure they keep themselves up to date as much as they should, and certainly I've heard stories of young people who have been diagnosed with dyslexia, and quite frankly, the support just hasn't been put in place as determined by the educational psychologist that's done the assessment. So I think there is more information out there. I think what we're struggling with is getting that information out to more people, and more SENCOs and teachers and parents looking to obtain more training and information. We need to get them clued up as to where to go for that information, because it is out there.
Yeah, and that's our combined mission as well.
Absolutely, yes. Why I blog a lot. That's why you do the work that you do. Yes.
Yeah. So, what are the common challenges for parents who are supporting their dyslexic children?
Well, from my perspective, and what I'm really passionate about, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So when my daughter was diagnosed, I remember reading her report on what was wrong with her. At the time, I didn't know a lot about dyslexia, but I knew enough that maybe a diagnosis would be useful. And as I read her report, I didn't expect the impact that report had on me personally. So I'm someone who went through education, who always wondered why he wasn't as good as his peers, and put in loads of work to study but got average results. And I just put it down to being not as clever, not as able to do the subjects. And it wasn't until 6 years ago, so I was 40, and I'm reading my daughter's report, that the penny dropped, and I realised that it's quite possible that I could have dyslexia too, or some kind of neurodiverse condition that is that caused me some problems when I was studying. Now, I was lucky, and I was able to come away from school with results, and I was still able to demonstrate that I was able to get on with the schoolwork, but it was a real challenge. A good friend of mine said to me once that the amount of effort that a dyslexic child puts into their schoolwork is the square of the effort that a child without dyslexia puts in. There's so much more effort put in, and I think when I read my daughter's report, it made me think, oh, am I dyslexic too? And then that set me on a whole path of self-development that I needed to work out. And I'm still on that path, and I probably would never get off that path. And so what's occurred to me is, as I've developed my work as a parenting coach, I have a group on Facebook called Parenting Dyslexia that I run, and a number of those parents. Well, it's interesting. There's just over 600 members of that group, and about 4 of them are dads. So there's an interesting dynamic. Another interesting dynamic is that talking to a number of parents, I hear fairly frequently, oh, yes, I'm dealing with my child's dyslexia at school, trying to get support. My partner can't deal with this. It's too emotionally painful for them, because they've had a hard time at school themselves. And their child's dyslexia is reminding them of their experiences as a child. And that's pressing some quite severe emotional buttons that can be quite disabling. And so then you've got this situation where you've got parents who are trying to work out what's going on for them. They're seeing, they're remembering stuff that's happened for them when they were a child. And we have to remember that dyslexia is genetic, so it comes from somewhere. In most cases, it's genetic. It can be acquired, but in most cases, it's genetic, passed down from parent to child. So there's going to be dyslexia traits with one or both of the parents. So if that parent, I'm thinking, I'm 46 now. When I was a child, there was no kind of real diagnosis, availability of information. We didn't have the internet, so it wasn't so easy to find information. So then a lot of people who are dyslexic back in my time, as it were, at school, they wouldn't have had a diagnosis, and they would have just had to have struggled through and done what they needed to do. And now they're seeing their kids getting diagnosed. And so there's this kind of like, oh, what would happen if I have got diagnosed when I was a child? Oh, actually, I don't feel good about myself because I've never dealt with my self-esteem as a result of whatever was happening back then. So I think with that going on, it's really difficult for the parent to then be 100% present with the needs of the child. So if you have parents who can't go into school because it's too painful for them, their children will see that, and they will understand. They will wonder, why won't their parents engage with something that is so crucially important for them? So I think there's a lot going on emotionally within families and with the dynamics. Another challenge is siblings. So you have a child that's got dyslexia, needs a lot of support. There's a lot going on, and then you have a situation where maybe the siblings feel left out. They're not dyslexic, they're not having problems, and they're wondering why they're not engaging with their parents as much when they can see their siblings engaging with the parents a lot more. So I think there's a load of dynamics going on that, from where I sit, I don't really see anyone dealing with that, anyone providing support for that, and I think that's been the main crux of my work as a parenting coach, is to start to throw up those issues and say, hey, is this happening for you? How is it affecting you as a parent, and how is it affecting the support that you give your child as they're trying to come to terms with what's going on for them?
Well, there's so much need around that. That is so true. So what do you say to also in the situations where maybe one parent is not dyslexic and they're not understanding what their child is going through, but the other parent is, and they're saying, I suffered through this and I know I did my research. We need to start early on to get the need our child needs. And the other parent is saying, well, maybe, just wait and, he'll learn how to do it, or she'll get around understanding the letters as time passes, but we know that's often not the case. So what would you say to parents who are dealing with that dynamic at home?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you've got one parent who knows about the dyslexia and the challenges that happen as a result of having it. Then you've got another parent who doesn't understand dyslexia, and then you've got like somewhere in between. When we're dealing with our children, how do we know that, for example, an untidy bedroom is down to a child not wanting to tidy their bedroom, or it's down to dyslexic thinking? Those kind of issues. So you can see a number of issues cropping up with parents, dyslexic or not, having to kind of negotiate. Okay, what behaviour is coming from dyslexic thinking, and what behaviour is coming from non-dyslexic thinking, and how do we move forward? To be honest, in that situation, I think both parents need to be self-aware. They need to understand how they're viewing what's going on. They need to I think they need to take a step back, and they need to allow themselves the space to not react to behaviour that becomes present straight away, without really trying to see what's going on behind it and to really understand it. I'll give you an example. Again, for my daughter, before she was diagnosed, we had a couple of years, or a number of years, where we would read a bedtime story to her before she'd go to sleep. And I'd say, well, why don't you have a go? And she would say, I hate reading. I don't want to. I hate reading. So at the time, our response to that was, well, this is just a 7-year-old child who doesn't want to read. They do reading all day at school. They're tired. They don't want to do that. It wasn't until a number of years later when we realized that actually she hated reading because it was such a struggle for her. She couldn't see the text. She would start reading one sentence and then she'd end up finishing the end of a sentence that was 4 sentences down. She'd be skipping all over the place, and it didn't make sense to her. Reading was boring. She couldn't get the meaning. Whether dyslexic or not, I think as parents we need to kind of think, well, our kids don't behave just for the sake of behaviour. They behave because something's happening for them. And I think in all walks of life, and not just parenting dyslexic kids, as parents, we perhaps need to remember that and not jump on the behaviour and make assumptions about why a child is behaving a certain way. We need to be quite, scientific is the wrong word, but we need to be able to say, well, what do we know that's going on? Okay, my child says that she hates reading, but she loves stories. Well, that doesn't make sense. Why would you hate reading when you love stories? So we need to do some adding up, and we need to think before we react.
And that's so beautiful. I love that. And going back to being present with the child and trying to understand why they're acting the way they are. It's hard though, especially at a younger age. They're not really articulate and they might not understand what's happening, and the reactions could be acting out in class, being the class clown. At home, really, as you said, I don't like books, I don't like reading,
Yeah.
I'm stupid, I hate homework, I hate school. This kind of, but why
Yeah.
is that? Where is that coming from? And understanding the struggles and then trying to bring the support as early as possible rather than reacting, which sometimes I feel like, even though we're trying to be really self-aware parents, it's difficult when we all work jobs and come home, try to do the dinner, homework, and then we kind of react. But again, just having the self-compassion to just relax and listen to what the child is saying and try to understand where they're coming from.
Absolutely.
But that's really the critical thing we need to do.
I think so. And considering that dyslexia is a language-based disorder, particularly for our younger children, where they're developing language and they're developing their ability to communicate with their peers and with us as parents, this is a tricky time. We make mistakes. For example, I can remember being 7 or 8 and being disappointed in myself because I couldn't pronounce my friends' names very well. Now, and that's quite a big thing when you're trying to be like normal with the rest of your friends, and you can't quite pronounce your friend's name properly, and everyone else can. So, that's a small example, but I think there is something in there about we need to recognise that actually. Whilst there are some real strengths with dyslexia, with dyslexic thinking, like creativity, entrepreneurship, there's loads of organisations talking about it, big picture thinking. At that stage of a child's life where they're developing language, there are some real challenges for them. And if they feel like they're failing to develop the abilities to communicate with their friends and parents and so forth, then that's where the self-esteem issues are going to start growing.
And that's true. And one thing I learned throughout this journey is like if very early on when my son would say, oh, I don't like books, or, oh, I feel I'm stupid, I would say, don't be silly. Of course you're smart. Instead of really listening and understanding where he's coming from and acknowledging his feelings, I would be like, oh, no, that's not true. That's not true. Don't even think about it. As if when I say that, it would make him feel better about himself. But I learned as a parent that it's just kind of listening and acknowledging what he's feeling is really the key here, because what he's feeling is what he's feeling. Doesn't matter how old they are. They can be 6, they can be 18, or even as adults. What we feel is our reality. And I feel like acknowledging the feelings he was feeling, he felt like we heard him, which really opened up a relationship that was way beyond where we were before he was diagnosed.
Absolutely. I think that is crucial. I think as parents, we can fall into the trap of wanting to fix our children's challenges straight away. Yeah. And if a child, no parent wants to hear their child say, I think I'm stupid. It is very tempting to say, you're not stupid, you're a clever child, look what you can do, blah, 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 blah. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to imprint our thinking onto our children. We want them to think like we're thinking, not help them to develop a healthy way of thinking for themselves. And in the same kind of way, that's kind of what's happening in school. So we want our kids to think, as teachers, we want our kids to think in a certain way. If you're going to do this kind of essay about history, then we need you to think in this kind of way. Or if you're going to work out some chemistry principles in class, then we need you to think in this way. Well, if you don't get it as a child or as a teenager, then teachers can sometimes try and force that onto them as well. And at the end of the day, no child or young person wants to be forced to think in another person's way. And actually, if we then, as children, try and adopt another adult's way of thinking, we will fail, and that will add to the problems with self-esteem. Because we need to be able to develop our own thinking and develop our own way of living that honours who we are and our differences and how we can move forward.
Yeah. Looking at my childhood, I remember when I felt like I wasn't good at something and I struggled, and adults in my life said, oh, don't be silly, don't be silly. I felt like they couldn't really see what my struggles were. And I had to either not take chances and fail so that I could hide how I really was, or just try to kind of act like everything was normal, but still inside the child knows, when they're struggling with something, they don't have to be told you're struggling. It's all in the brain, it's all in the heart. And then it becomes like, how do I hide this? Then I don't take chances, or just I accept it, or I start acting out in different ways. So I relate to what you're saying as a parent and as a child, when when I went through my own struggles.
Mm.
Sorry.
Mm.
So what do you say to parents when they say, we don't know if we want to tell the diagnosis to our child, we don't want to label the child, and we maybe if we tell he or she is dyslexic, he will feel different?
That's a really good one. My personal belief about dyslexia is that it is just a different way of thinking, and it's a cliche. Loads of people say it, but at the end of the day, where it's painfully obvious, is in the school system, and certainly there are numerous examples of people who have been dyslexic. They've struggled through school, and then they've left school and they've gone into the big wide world, and they've made it their own, and been very successful as a result of that. Richard Branson's a classic one for that. So I don't like the idea of labeling people. I love the term neurodiverse, because that just says that people think differently, and that is a label, but it's not quite as bad as dyslexia, which I think the term dyslexia doesn't adequately describe what we now understand that dyslexia is. I think there needs to be a balance between a child being diagnosed with a condition that requires support. So from the supporter's perspective, we need to be able to identify what the needs are and be able to support that child. And it may be for some, using the term dyslexia is more helpful than maybe talking about the actual needs. For others, it may be that we don't call a child dyslexic, but we say, okay, this child can't copy down the words from the board, so in a timely manner. So let's allow them to take photographs of the board so that they've got the information with them on their phone or something like that. Or let's present our materials up front, because actually they will process that information better. And I think there's like a wavelength of what do you do? Do we diagnose, and do we label, and then, or do we think about the various needs that could happen in the classroom and plan to support that? So in terms of a child and a parent and child relationship, I'm not sure that we can get away with not saying to a child, okay, we think that you think in a way that is dyslexic. And some of those challenges are because as a child, you need to understand what those challenges are that you're experiencing. If you spend most of your life wondering why you do things and there's no answer for that, that is going to be more unsettling than understanding what's happening. So I think that there needs to be a balance, and I think that we need to be able to empower our children to understand what they need in the classroom, so that they can self-advocate. So they can say to the teacher, "Miss, you're writing stuff on the board and then you're rubbing it off really quickly, and I can't write it down quick enough. Can we find another way to make this work better? I really want to learn your subject, but at the moment I'm more anxious about keeping up than I am about learning the content." And helping our kids to find a way to do that. Does it mean that they maybe move positions in the class? Maybe. My daughter found it easier to be at the front of the class and see the board and be able to copy. She taught me the trick about using your mobile phone to take a picture of the board. I'm doing a counselling course at the moment, and one of the things that drives me nuts is I walk in and we've got our teacher who writes a load of really bad handwriting across the board, and then for 15 minutes people are sat there copying it, and these are people who aren't dyslexic, right? So as well as I know there's about 5 in my class that are dyslexic, I just come in and I see the board and I just get my iPad and take a picture of it, and then I'm like not stressed. It's like, great, I've got it, I'm not going to miss it, I can read it in my own leisure. I think there's a lot that we can do to help kids, but equally we need to empower our kids to be able to say, okay, I want to study like this because this is how my brain works, and I know that it's going to be so much better than you telling me to handwrite this. Give me a laptop to type it. My daughter was given a laptop. She wasn't given specialist software. She just had a laptop and she just typed everything, and that worked for her. There's so much technology out there and so many different ways of doing things. It doesn't have to be the way that the teacher does it or the parent thinks that they should do it. We should empower our kids to be able to understand need and then be able to find strategies that work for them.
And become advocates for themselves in the classroom.
Absolutely. Yeah. Big thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, is there any advice that you can give to parents that you say, like, this is like this one advice that is so critical that I feel like every parent should put this in place today?
Oh, well, I think we touched on it earlier, and that's the taking a step back and listening.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's crucial for any parent, regardless of whether there's dyslexia involved or any other kind of need involved. Our children are developing as they move into their teenage years and beyond, and there's evidence to suggest that we're still seeing our kids developing into their mid-20s. That it doesn't just stop as soon as you hit 18. So I think what we need to do as parents is not make assumptions, take a step back, listen, and really be present with what's going on for our children. I joke about, I do some training with people, and I joke about the way language is used and how we listen to language. And one of my jokes is about, I play guitar in a band with a bunch of friends, and I've joked a couple of times about when I've said to my wife, "Oh, I'm going to go and play my band tonight for 5 hours. Is that okay, darling?" And she might go, "Fine." Right? So if I'm listening to just the word, then that's great. She said, "Fine, I'm off the hook, I'm safe." But actually, there's a lot of emotion behind what's there. And actually, I'd be a brave man if I didn't listen to that emotion behind it. And I think that's what I'm advocating here, is that we need to be able to listen to the words that our children are saying, but we need to be able to listen beyond the words and take in what's going on behind those words. Are you happy? Yes. There's a red flag, right? And then beyond that, we need to be able to understand what's going on in the environment that our children are in. And I think that's where we can really help our kids to self-advocate, is to help them to understand what's happening. And then in the background, we can have our meetings with the schools. We can be pushing for support, and we can do everything we can to empower our kids. So we can't do any of that if we don't listen and take a step back.
I love that. So let's put a little bit positive spin on the discussion and talk about the strengths that come with dyslexia.
Yeah, I think there's loads, and I think if you read a lot of blogs and you go to sort of resource websites, there's a lot of talk about creativity and entrepreneurship and people skills and big picture thinking. And I think as general headlines, they're really, really useful. But I think there's so much talent and ability amongst people in general. We're talking about, everyone thinks differently. So, and I think this is a problem with the labeling, isn't it? Sometimes we can think, oh, well, they're dyslexic, but they're not. Yeah, but actually that person over there's got their own issues with thinking. We're all here on this planet doing what we do. So, but I do think that with dyslexics, I think there is a real creative strength. And that doesn't mean to say that you can paint a really good picture. It may be you're creative in other ways. It took me quite a while to recognise my own creativity. I've been playing in a band for 30 years. That's creative. Playing an instrument's creative. You'll make sounds and you'll make it in a way that is your own way of doing it. That's creative. You express your creativity in different ways. My daughter, for example, she's a singer, and she's doing a musical theatre degree, and she wants to sing on the West End. So she loves acting, singing, and that's a creative skill. But equally, other skills are like how you talk to people. What I said earlier about parents listening and taking a step back, I think, so from my own experience, a lot of dyslexics spend their time in school watching other people, watching other people, seeing if they're feeling accepted, watching the skills of other people, because they're not sure about themselves. And that whilst that's a terrible thing in one level, to be going through that experience, I think in adult life, being able to watch other people and being able to tune in with empathy to what's going on with other people is a great people skill. And it's no surprise then that you do see people who are dyslexic working in people-focused roles where they're maybe they're working in sales, or they're marketing, or maybe they're working in charities and coming alongside people with real need, because they're able to tune into what's going on behind what people are saying. So I think there's an awful lot of strength out there, and it's a shame that for a lot of dyslexics they have to wait until they've left school before they can really discover them. And there's a lot more that I think schools could do to help people, to dyslexic children, to realise what their strengths are, but they're just not understood.
So true. And it's also, as parents and as educators, how do we define success with our children? Is it the grades? Is it their critical thinking? Every child and every person, as you said, is unique, and we have to make sure that the success is defined based on who that person is.
Agreed. I think I have two daughters, and my other daughter, who I haven't talked a lot about, my oldest daughter, Beth, she's got ADHD, and she was diagnosed with that when she was 18. So she had a different experience. But she was very academic at school, and then when she got into the next stage up, what we call A levels, which I think is high school in the States, the amount of work involved ramped up an awful lot, and then she started to struggle. For her, she got a lot of satisfaction out of the results that she got from her studies, and then when those results didn't turn up, that was really difficult for her, and something didn't make sense. For my other daughter, Jess, it isn't about results in school. For her, it was about feeling satisfied with what she does and living her own values, I think. As parents, myself and my wife, we didn't put a value on results. Yes, we used them as metrics if we thought there was a problem at school, but at the end of the day, we've always felt that if our kids can get on with people and use those strengths and be true to themselves as to what they want to be doing in the future, or how they want to be feeling in the future as well. Interestingly, both my kids, I say kids, they're 19 and 21 this year, but both of them have chosen undergraduate courses which aren't overly academic. They relate to hobbies that they've done in the past, which they now want to make a vocation. And it makes them feel good. It makes them feel fulfilled. They know they're on the right paths for them. And for me, I beam with pride because I can see them doing that, rather than them, say, deciding to do a chemistry degree like I did, and going into science. Why would I want my kids to copy me? Sometimes we can put an agenda onto our kids, and I don't want to do that. Apart from the only agenda is to live a life that honours one's own values and honours how we want to feel in our careers. And so far, it feels like we're going in the right direction with the kids. And I hope that works for a lot of other people.
That's true. Well, thank you so much for being with us on the summit today. So if people want to get in touch with you, how can they find you? And I will put the links in the bottom as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, the best website to find me on would be my Parenting Dyslexia blog. This is a blog that I write which focuses on those interactions in family, like I mentioned earlier, the sort of emotional well-being of the family rather than specifically dyslexia. And that I can be found at www.parentingdyslexia.co.uk. Apart from that, you can also find me on Twitter, and I'm Dyslexia Blogger on Twitter.
That's great. I will put the links in the bottom so people can get in touch with you. And you do work with parents across the pond as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I work with Skype and all the other different types of web kind of cool software, and I use the phone as well. So, and I do mix that up. So anyone who wants to get in touch with me, I'd be happy to explore that further with them.
Well, thank you so much again. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely. Thank you.